Well, this morning, everyone awoke to the tragic news of a mass shooting in Aurora, Colorado, and a midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises.
A night at the movies turned into a night of terror for moviegoers in Colorado.
Deadly shooting at a movie theater in the Denver suburb of Aurora.
Horrific shooting in Aurora.
One of the worst mass shootings in American history in a crowded Colorado movie theater.
The gunman entered the crowded theater after midnight local time, threw gas canisters releasing smoke, and then started shooting.
12 dead, 50 wounded.
The youngest victim, only a few months old, a baby.
Armed with an assault rifle and 2 handguns, came in through a theater exit.
50 victims, 12 of which have died, 38 others being treated.
The gunman wore a bulletproof vest, also a gas mask, as he detonated gas canisters and then opened fire.
Stood in front of the screen and began firing indiscriminately.
In all, 50 people were shot.
The suspect in custody identified as 24-year-old James Holmes, who lived in Aurora.
24-year-old James Holmes.
It was a night at the movies that turns into a day of tragedy, shock, and grief.
Now, what happened in Aurora is nothing short of a horrific tragedy, one that makes everybody pause and realize how unpredictable life really is, how it can be taken away just like that. And the victims of this shooting included young children, the youngest of them being only 3 months old. Now, for now, we still know very little about the shooter or what the motives may have been, but as usual, this morning we saw immediate attempts to point fingers.
The gunman was possibly dressed like one of the characters in the movie, and that sort of fooled people.
Is this simply the terrible, terrible collision between some dark Trekkie-like person's fantasy world and reality?
I'm not saying video games make you a killer, but if you're a psychopath, video games help you get in the mood to do the killing. So it is a problem in our society with teenage psychopaths that they do get, inspired by a lot of this and want to make it real.
What really gets me as a Christian is to see the ongoing attacks on Judeo-Christian beliefs, and then some senseless, crazy act of terror like this takes place.
The FBI will be trying to determine if this individual was a member of any other terrorist organization, possibly a neo-Nazi group.
There is a Jim Holmes of Aurora, Colorado page on the Colorado Tea Party site as well, talking about him joining the Tea Party last year.
Now, I think that there are a couple of points that can be made about what happened, but even more so, there are a lot of questions that we'll need to ask. First of all, the politicization, the mistakes that are made in blaming groups, blaming people. We see that all the time whenever there's a horrible breaking news story like this. And part of it, I think, is because of the 24-hour news cycle, where cable networks have to fill the time with talking heads, even though there's still very little to talk about outside of the details of what happened and hearing from those who witnessed it. And so what we get is speculation about video games, the Tea Party, life imitating art from criminologists and TV pundits, but the truth is that it's too soon to say anything. Now, one of the things that I think that we can compare is the internet, social media, and how the story developed there. See, much of the video that we've seen was shot on people's camera phones. Some people have compiled tweets from victims and witnesses before, during, and after this shooting. Perhaps one of the most eerie stories so far being that of Jessica Redfield, an aspiring sportscaster who just the other week escaped a mall shooting in Toronto, wrote about it, and then only became one of the victims in Aurora. Her final tweet was sent just before the movie. Now, there are a lot of blogs out there that have compiled tweets in timeline format. The same was done on Reddit. One shooting victim even posted pictures of himself on Reddit after being shot. Now, the internet is just as prone to mistakes, but it moves at such a fast speed that I think it can be much more self-corrective than television news is. And it can give us immediate reactions, pictures, videos, things that give us personal insight into what happened before network cameras and reporters can all rush to the scene. But now let's talk about the many questions that tragic events like this raise. Obviously, the issue of gun control always comes up in a mass shooting. Now, there's no way to prevent lone wolf individuals from wanting to inflict harm onto others. The saying, it's not guns that kill people, but people that kill people. But if that's the case, then shouldn't we trust people enough to be able, or should we trust people enough to be able to purchase multiple lethal weapons? I think questions as to whether or not it's too easy to get your hands on a gun are completely appropriate in a situation like this. Reports say that Holmes purchased all of his weapons legally over the last few months, the first one being in May. But it makes you wonder what resources are really being devoted to also. What are our intelligence agencies really up to? Because we live in a surveillance state. We talk about that all the time. The examples coming from the government are plenty. But it's not just the government. Our every consumer habit is monitored by private businesses. And I wish it wasn't so. I'm not advocating for a surveillance or a police state by any means, but then what are they actually monitoring? Who are they monitoring? For many of the examples that we've seen, it's been peaceful environmental activists, Occupy activists, and of course, how could we forget, entire Muslim communities solely because of their religion. None of that is going to stop a lone gunman. And I'd say that making sure that they can't get their hands on guns would be more helpful, though. We have more mass shootings than other countries. We average 20 of them every single year. But then again, there's another side to it. I have a hard time listening to people like New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who's used today's tragedy to take to the airwaves, call for strict gun control, all while he's protected with an army of bodyguards who are heavily armed. This as we move closer to a police state, as we've seen in the Occupy crackdowns over the last year, and as we've seen for years in the SWAT team no-knock raids that are part of the war on drugs. But I don't think that that means that citizens should react with violence and get lethal weapons. I'm sure a lot of you out there disagree. But I think that all of this they're all questions that need to be raised. It's all points that need to be discussed. And we should have a civil public discussion. We shouldn't overreact with too much fear. We shouldn't tell people that they can't leave their homes or even take their children to the movies. But we should try to understand why this particular kind of problem is so American, why it happens here more than anywhere else. And I'm sure the media will get to that once they're done talking to witnesses and family members of victims and local officials today. That's not an area where a show like ours can compete, nor do we try to. So tonight it's not necessarily a miss. It's more like a hope that out of this horrific event, we can move forward without forgetting and without overreacting, but in a more sensible and rational way. That something will actually come from all of the discussions that we are sure to hear over the next few weeks.